They thought the storm had passed. That silence meant forgiveness. But behind the palace walls, King Charles was watching, waiting, weighing his options with clinical detachment. And when he finally made his move, it was colder than anyone could have imagined. This wasn't just a decision. It was a royal execution by silence. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. In the aftermath of Harry and Meghan's turbulent exit from royal life, there existed a fragile illusion of détente. Public statements became rare, interviews dried up, and even the tabloids seemed momentarily distracted. But what many mistook for peace was something far more dangerous: preparation. Behind the gilded walls of Buckingham Palace, King Charles had withdrawn not in defeat, but in deliberation. Those closest to the monarch reported an eerie calm overtaking his daily routine. Gone were the long-winded reflections or even subtle remarks about his youngest son. In their place, silence. A silence that carried weight, that lingered like fog before a storm. He had entered what aides whispered as his judgment mood, a phase marked by deep isolation and unbroken study of royal precedents, legal frameworks, and constitutional powers few living monarchs had dared to invoke. At the same time, Meghan, sensing a rare opening, began extending quiet gestures of reconciliation. Discreet messages through mutual contacts, offers of informal charity collaboration, even a proposal for a low-profile appearance at a Commonwealth event. But every move was met with the same response: none. Not rejection, not resistance, just absolute, impenetrable silence. William and Catherine, though fully aware of the building storm, were reportedly under strict instruction to maintain total neutrality. They hosted events. They smiled. But they did not interfere. Not even when Meghan's anxiety began showing, nor when Harry's own circle started sensing the Cold War turning dangerously real. What Charles had begun was not a reaction, but a calculated campaign, a strategic dismantling, one move at a time. He was combing through years of correspondence, digging into legal precedent, calling for private reports on the Sussexes' overseas dealings, and consulting with royal legal counsel whose names had not been seen on any official list in decades. This wasn't about family. It was about the crown. And the moment Charles began separating his role as a father from his duty as sovereign, the outcome was no longer in question. The only remaining variable was when he would strike and how far he'd be willing to go to protect the monarchy's future from the legacy of his own son. But if silence was the beginning, what followed next shattered any illusion of peace, starting with a royal message that would never be spoken aloud, yet heard around the world. No press release, no public condemnation, just a sealed letter, hand-delivered to Montecito, marked with the royal crest and the unmistakable weight of finality. Its contents were never officially released, but insiders would soon leak every cold, calculated word. There was no warning, no calls from the palace, no whisper of protocol, just a knock at the gate of Harry and Meghan's California estate and a courier dressed in unmarked black, escorted by discreet private security. The envelope was thick, its seal unmistakable, the crest of the king. But the message inside carried no trace of warmth, no flicker of familial concern. It was not a letter from a father. It was a ruling from a monarch, legal, final, absolute. Inside, the words read with surgical coldness, every sentence stripped of sentiment. The opening line didn't even use their names. It began simply, "To the Duke and Duchess of Sussex." What followed was not a request, it was a decree. According to palace sources, the letter stripped them of any and all remaining royal advisory privileges, effective immediately, no appearances, no representation, no involvement in charitable foundations connected to the crown. But what rattled them most wasn't the content, it was the tone. Each sentence delivered like a blow, framed in constitutional language that made it clear. There would be no second chance, no path back, no appeal. And the final line? It froze time. This concludes all royal obligations and privileges now and henceforth. Meghan reportedly collapsed into tears, whispering, He's finished us. Harry stood still for a long time, letter in hand, eyes glazed over in disbelief. He had imagined many scenarios, but not this. Not an execution by envelope, not a banishment written in such deliberate detachment. Behind the scenes, some royal aides expressed quiet unease at the severity of the letter's language. Queen Camilla, according to insiders, advised a softer approach but was overruled. Charles had made his decision, and in his mind, this was the only way to ensure the monarchy's survival. Emotions had no place in what he viewed as a necessary purge of confusion, contradiction, and chaos from the House of Windsor. By severing the last administrative ties, he ensured Harry and Meghan's names would no longer appear in any internal discussion, meeting, or long-term strategy of the firm. They had not just been pushed aside, they had been surgically removed. The letter may have ended with a period, but its implications exploded across every room of the palace. A door hadn't just closed, it had been bricked shut. And while the world speculated about reconciliation, the king had quietly chosen legacy over lineage. But the letter was just the beginning. King Charles had something even colder in store, a symbolic move that would echo across royal history and erase them from the line in more ways than one. With a stroke of a pen and the weight of a crown, King Charles didn't just sever ties, he reached into the lineage itself and rewrote history. Harry and Meghan weren't just distanced, they were erased. In a secretive royal council meeting held behind locked doors, King Charles did what no monarch in recent memory had dared to consider. He invoked powers so ancient they hadn't been formally exercised in over a century prerogative authority that allowed the sovereign to shape the very framework of succession without parliament, without debate, without delay. Advisors sat in stunned silence as Charles calmly presented his intentions, citing stability, legacy, and clarity for the future of the monarchy. What began as whispers of strategic distancing escalated into a full-blown lineage recalibration. And when the final page of the royal decree was signed, the House of Windsor would never look the same again. The titles were the first to fall. Archie and Lilibet, once automatically entitled to His Royal Highness and Her Royal Highness under royal custom, were quietly stripped of those honours. No formal announcement, no press release, just a line inserted into the Royal Succession Index. Titles revoked by sovereign discretion. The line of succession itself was restructured, updated legal documentation confirmed that neither Harry nor his children would be considered for any future state responsibility, no matter the scenario. Their bloodline had not been questioned, but their eligibility had been shattered. Meghan, upon learning of the final restructuring, reportedly called it a generational wipeout. It wasn't just exile, it was obliteration. A conscious effort to cut them out of the royal equation at every level, down to the ink on official papers. Queen Camilla, sources say, raised concerns behind closed doors, not out of compassion, but from fear of the backlash such a move could spark. This could look like cruelty, she warned. Like punishment, not policy. But Charles remained unmoved. In his eyes, this was not vengeance, it was preservation. For too long, the monarchy had walked a fine line between modernity and confusion. Now, he believed, it needed certainty. And certainty required sacrifice, even if that sacrifice was his own son. Palace advisors were split. Some begged for a delay, warning that this decision once made public could fracture whatever goodwill remained between the Crown and the Commonwealth. But Charles didn't hesitate. "Let the people see clarity," he reportedly said. "Let them know who holds the pen." And with that, history shifted. The monarchy had spoken. The bloodline had not been questioned, but its relevance had been stripped clean. Still, nothing prepared the public or the couple for what came next. Because Charles wasn't done, he wanted the world to see his judgment. First, their photos vanished from palace halls, then from state brochures, then from the official royal website. Within weeks, it was as if Harry and Meghan had never existed. A royal purge, pixel by pixel. It began quietly, almost too subtle to notice an empty space on a gallery wall, a missing image from a slideshow, a removed paragraph from a ceremonial booklet, but within days, the silence gave way to whispers, and the whispers to shock. Royal photographers were given direct and urgent orders. Remove all portraits of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex from public displays within the royal residences. Not archived, not relocated, erased. At the National Portrait Gallery, a once prominent photograph of the couple at the Commonwealth Day service was quietly replaced with a landscape of Sandringham. At Windsor, an entire panel of family moments, once showcasing 3 generations of royalty, was suddenly reduced to 2. It was not just omission. It was deliberate subtraction. Then came the unveiling of the new annual family painting, a tradition meant to symbolize unity and heritage. But when the curtain fell, it revealed a scene that shocked even long-time royal watchers. William, Catherine, Charles, Camilla, and the next heirs stood in perfect formation. But there was no sign of Harry. No Meghan. Not even the youngest grandchildren, Archie and Lilibet, were present. What should have been a subtle nod to the monarchy's evolution, instead, became a visual declaration of removal. Meghan, upon seeing the painting through a forwarded image, reportedly told friends, "They erased us, like we were a mistake." Online, the purge moved even faster. The official royal website underwent what was described as a streamlining operation, with biographies of the Sussexes rewritten in neutral, minimalistic terms. References to their wedding, their patronages, their once public roles were slashed to the barest mentions. And worse, key archival materials disappeared altogether. The page celebrating Prince Archie's christening, once part of the Royal Digital Archive, was scrubbed entirely. It wasn't just history being altered, it was identity being undone. The message was clear. This was not a family dispute. This was a state reset. Even internal staff, some of whom had worked directly with Harry and Meghan during their time in the firm, were reportedly disturbed by the intensity of the erasure. Several questioned the precedent how a royal bloodline could be so thoroughly wiped from imagery, documentation, and memory with such ruthless precision. But Charles, according to palace insiders, was unshaken. He viewed the symbolic cleansing as essential, an assertion of order, continuity, and control. The public might see cruelty, but he saw necessity. And if symbols had the power to define legacy, then the absence of one could just as powerfully define rejection. But Charles didn't stop at symbols, he moved next to something far more permanent: financial severance. In one cold financial order, all remaining royal funding to Harry and Meghan was pulled retroactively. No safety net, no negotiation. Charles wasn't punishing them, he was ending them. What came next wasn't just a decision, it was a reckoning. After removing them from titles, roles, and imagery, King Charles turned his gaze toward the last remaining thread that connected the Sussexes to the institution: money. With the same precision and silence that had defined every step of his campaign, he signed off on a private financial directive that would send shockwaves through the palace and far beyond it. Effective immediately, all state-funded security reimbursements for Harry and Meghan were to be terminated, no transition period, no consultations. What once had been a carefully negotiated arrangement to maintain dignity and protection was now void, cold, final, non-negotiable. But Charles didn't stop there. His order reached deeper. Access to remaining segments of royal trust income accounts set aside for discretionary use by senior members of the family was frozen. Not just suspended, frozen indefinitely. A private memo, leaked weeks later, revealed the chilling clarity of his language. No state funds, past, present, or future, shall be directed to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex or their dependents under any condition. The move stunned not only royal aides but even seasoned insiders who had believed Charles would stop short of financial purse. Severance. But the king had no intention of leaving room for ambiguity. This wasn't cost-cutting. It was obliteration by ledger. Caught completely off guard, Harry and Meghan were said to be scrambling to renegotiate security details, logistical obligations, and contractual partnerships. The assumption had always been that, despite the fallout, A minimal financial courtesy would remain in place, a buffer, a gesture of familial respect. Instead, the rug was pulled out from beneath them with surgical timing. Sources close to their circle described a sense of betrayal, not just at the action itself, but at the method, quiet, ruthless, and irreversible. Every step had been calculated to prevent their legal teams from mounting a swift counter. By the time the letter reached them, the money was already gone. Even third-party benefactors found themselves blocked. Wealthy donors tied to royal-linked charities who expressed interest in assisting the couple were reportedly discouraged subtly, yet effectively, by palace intermediaries. The message was clear. Any act of financial support would be seen as disloyalty to the crown. The chill spread fast. Within days, events involving Sussex-linked foundations were quietly postponed or stripped of royal partnerships. The mood within the palace, according to one insider, was described as cold as Balmoral in midwinter. But to Charles, this wasn't about vengeance. It was about drawing the line decisively, unflinchingly, and without regret. Yet the cruelest blow didn't come from pen, portrait, or pocket, but from something far deeper. Legacy. She was the last thread connecting Harry to home. But even the Queen's legacy couldn't shield him now. Charles made sure that her wishes, real or imagined, would not be used as weapons against the crown. The bond between Harry and his grandmother had once been the monarchy's final hope for reconciliation. Quietly, the Queen had kept in touch, even after the stormiest interviews and headlines. Her handwritten letters to Harry, filled with affection and sorrow, had become sacred to him, a lifeline to a version of the family that hadn't yet fractured. But now, that too was gone. In the days following the financial severance, a royal archivist was reportedly dispatched to Montecito under a confidential directive. All remaining documents and correspondence from the late Queen were to be reclaimed, recatalogued, and placed under sovereign control. Letters, once gifted in trust, were deemed matters of historical sensitivity, a phrase carefully chosen to mask the brutal truth. Harry was being cut off not only from the present, but from his past. It didn't stop there. The Queen's jewellery, a symbol of lineage and legacy, had been delicately divided in the months after her passing. Among the items, a small but meaningful piece, a sapphire brooch, had allegedly been earmarked for Lilibet. It was whispered to have been one of the Queen's personal wishes, a gesture of connection to the great-granddaughter she never truly got to know. But that promise, too, was undone. Without announcement or justification, the piece was reassigned to Princess Charlotte. The royal jewellers were instructed to update the records. No ceremony, no explanation, just a quiet transfer that echoed louder than any press statement. For Meghan, the moment of heartbreak came not through the tabloids or palace whispers, but through a velvet box delivered back to her door. Inside was a bracelet, once gifted by the Queen during her first solo engagement with Meghan. It had been a moment of triumph, then one that marked rare royal approval. But now, the bracelet came with a note, short, unforgiving, no longer appropriate under current circumstances. Meghan reportedly broke down, clutching the box, repeating the same words again and again. Whatever thread had remained between her and the crown was gone. In the shadows of these removals, Charles appointed a new guardian of the Queen's personal vault, Princess Anne. Known for her discipline and unshakable loyalty, Anne would now decide what passed forward and what was locked away. It was a choice designed to ensure that sentiment would not overrule strategy. Even William, when present for the private handover of documents and heirlooms, appeared visibly disturbed. But he did not object. The path had been chosen. The Queen's memory had been folded into the institution and removed from personal reach. With legacy erased and resources cut, one final nail remained: public humiliation disguised as royal protocol. When King Charles took the throne, one absence rang louder than any anthem. Harry and Meghan weren't just missing. They were forbidden. It was exile, in full daylight, broadcast to the world. The coronation of King Charles III was designed to project stability, unity, and timeless tradition. Every robe, every bell, Every gold-trimmed seat carried weight beyond spectacle. It was monarchy at its most performative and powerful, but it was the empty chairs that told the real story. Behind the ceremonial pageantry, a leaked security clearance list revealed what the official narrative tried to obscure. Harry and Meghan had been denied access. Not just sidelined or left out of planning, but formally excluded from the physical grounds of the event. The press was quietly told they had graciously declined the invitation. But insiders knew the truth: there had never been one. The doors were closed before they even reached the threshold. Behind closed doors in Montecito, the news hit like a final verdict. Meghan, learning of the seating plan and exclusion, reportedly broke down in tears. For Harry, it was isolation of a different kind. He had long prepared himself for tension, for distance, but not for complete invisibility. The royal seating plan, publicly released days before the event, named every senior and junior royal expected to appear. William, Catherine, Anne, Edward, even distant cousins. But not one line for the Sussexes. Not even for their children. Archie and Lilibet's names were absent from the official coronation programs. No mention, no acknowledgement, as if their branch of the family tree had been quietly sawed off and discarded. And still, the event moved forward, broadcast live to millions. The spectacle of Charles receiving the crown, of William kneeling in homage, of the family gathered in choreographed loyalty, became an image etched into history. Meghan, thousands of miles away, was photographed wearing black, not at a funeral but as a statement, not in mourning for a monarch, but for the final burial of any illusion that they were still part of the institution. It wasn't about fashion, it was about farewell. The last page of a chapter she hadn't chosen to write, but was now forced to close. For many viewers, the absence was jarring. Questions poured in across media platforms. Why wasn't Harry there? Where was Meghan? But the palace offered nothing but silence. Controlled, composed, and brutal. The optics were clear. This was a monarchy that no longer made room for rebellion, even if that rebellion was once blood. Behind the scenes, sources described the energy around the coronation as tight, scripted, and deliberate. The message was unmistakable. You are either part of the crown, or you are forgotten by it. But even after all this, one last secret remained: Charles's private judgment, never spoken aloud until it leaked. In a room meant to remain sealed from public ears, King Charles uttered the words that defined his reign and destroyed his youngest son's future. A hidden recording changed everything. The moment was never meant to leave the chamber. It was a private debriefing, a confidential gathering of the king's closest advisors following the coronation. The air was thick with tension. Legacy had been secured, but wounds still lingered beneath the surface. I can't protect what tears the crown apart. Not even my own blood. The words were captured by a discreet device left active by an unknown staffer. The recording, raw and unfiltered, was eventually leaked, and once it surfaced, nothing could contain the fallout. It wasn't a statement. It was a sentence. Not only against Harry and Meghan, but against the possibility of reconciliation. The king hadn't simply closed the door. He had set it on fire. The reaction was immediate. Meghan, already reeling from the systematic unraveling of their place in royal history, was reportedly shattered. "That's who he really is," she confided to a friend, her voice breaking. It wasn't the cruelty that hurt most, it was the clarity. This wasn't a man wrestling with pain. This was a sovereign who had made peace with erasure. For Harry, the recording landed like a final betrayal. The father he once believed would come around had publicly confirmed what the documents, the deletions, and the distance had already implied. There was no path back, not through duty, not through family, not through time. Inside the palace, silence reigned. No comment, no denial, and perhaps most chilling of all, no surprise. Aides had long suspected that Charles had crossed the emotional threshold months before. But hearing it said aloud, captured for the world to dissect, stripped away any remaining ambiguity. William, according to sources, was furious not at the content of the message, but at its exposure. The leak, he feared, would erode what remained of the monarchy's dignity. But even he did not dispute the words. No one did, because everyone knew Charles had meant them. Outside the palace walls, public opinion fractured. For some, Charles's statement was seen as a necessary line in the sand, an assertion that the monarchy's survival could not be compromised by personal sentiment. For others, it was a revelation of icy calculation. A father who had chosen crown over child, optics over healing. The headlines split accordingly. A king's duty in one, a father's betrayal in another. The debate raged online, in parliament halls, and across global news cycles. But through it all, the man at the centre of it, King Charles, remained silent, neither confirming the quote nor condemning it. And in that silence, the quote hardened into something permanent, something official, something unforgettable. But while the monarchy moved on, something darker lingered, because what Charles ended wasn't just a relationship. It was a bloodline's hope for healing. Years from now, royal historians won't debate what happened, they'll debate why. Was it justice or vengeance? One thing remains clear. King Charles made a choice that changed the House of Windsor forever. As the dust settled from the media storm, the silence that followed spoke louder than any headline. Harry and Meghan's camp attempted to reclaim the narrative with carefully worded statements, veiled interviews, and leaked insights from anonymous sources. But the world had grown colder, the audience smaller. Their words, once explosive, now landed with muted echoes. The press, once eager to publish every whisper, had moved on. There were no more battles to fight. The palace had already declared victory not with noise, but with absence. The couple's media push fizzled under the weight of an institution that refused to engage. That, in itself, became the final form of dominance. Inside the royal fold, a new order had quietly taken hold. William, once seen as hesitant in the face of family conflict, emerged from the shadows. His appearances with Catherine became more frequent, more coordinated, and more strategic. The symbolism was unmistakable. This was the future. A united front. A monarchy with clear lines of loyalty. There was no room for ambiguity anymore. The public saw it. The press embraced it. And Charles, watching from behind the curtain, let it unfold without interference. Where he had once been at the center, he was now the architect, his plan complete, his legacy recalibrated. Amid the quiet, one royal earned rare and universal respect. Princess Anne, unshaken and resolute, became the unspoken anchor of the crown during the crisis. Her refusal to engage in drama, her willingness to carry out her duties without wavering, and her rumoured role in enforcing the Queen's legacy solidified her position as the monarchy's silent enforcer. To many within the palace, she didn't just hold the line, she was the line. Outside the palace, the public remained divided. Some saw Charles's actions as the necessary purging of a dysfunctional branch. Others saw cruelty hidden beneath protocol. But no matter the opinion, the results were undeniable. The monarchy had survived the fracture, and Charles's cold strategy had succeeded where compromise never could. The firm stood. The institution endured. And the cost had been exacted in full. Rumours began circulating that Charles, meticulous even in mortality, had drafted exclusion clauses into his final will, ensuring that the Sussexes and their children would be officially bypassed in matters of inheritance, land, and legacy. True or not, the whispers fed the narrative that the severance was eternal. For Archie and Lilibet, the consequences were generational. They would grow up not as fringe royals, but as strangers to the very institution their blood once flowed through. The shadow of Windsor would not touch them, not with privilege, not with protection, and certainly not with presence. In the end, it wasn't a scandal that ended Harry and Meghan's royal life. It was the coldest judgment of all. Silence, erasure, and legacy denied. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.